On the 26th of October 1944, whilst the Second World War was gripping Europe, the death of Queen Victoria's final child took place. Princess Beatrice died 66 years after the first child of the long-reigning British monarch passed away, her elder sister Alice. Beatrice, of course, outlived her mother, and she saw a huge amount of historic events in her 87 years. She was a minor royal, and of course, as the heirs of Victoria and their children took the throne in their own direction, she had less of a role in society. But Beatrice did spend roughly 30 years editing Queen Victoria's journals. But what is the story of her life and also her death? Princess Beatrice was born on the 14th of April 1857 inside of Buckingham Palace. She was the youngest of the 9 children that Queen Victoria and Prince Albert had. Her birth was controversial after it was announced that Victoria would use chloroform, during this administered by a royal doctor, Dr. John Snow. This was at the time considered dangerous, but Victoria revelled in the use of the drug and anaesthetic. The name Beatrice was chosen for the girl, and she was baptised in the private chapel in Buckingham Palace. She became a favourite child, and she became known as Baby. And her father wrote, "Baby practices her scales like a good prima donna before a performance and has a good voice." Victoria believed she was beautiful and stated that she was a pretty plump and flourishing child, and very fine large blue eyes, and a pretty little mouth, and very fine skin. Beatrice brought the Queen a lot of joy, and she had a rather relaxed infancy and was acknowledged as the last royal child, and she was to be the final. In March of 1861, Victoria's mother died at Frogmore, and Victoria broke down in grief, and Beatrice began to be a good comfort to her mother. Victoria relied on Beatrice and her sister Alice many times, including when their father Albert died. Victoria was plunged into grief. She shut herself off to her family, and Beatrice was often taken from the cot by Victoria and was comforted. She was a great help to her, despite her young age, and when John Brown, her servant, died, Victoria yet again relied on Beatrice. Despite her young age, there were many suitors considered for Princess Beatrice. The Queen thought she should not marry anyone and stay with her. However, one possible man who could have had her hand was Napoleon Eugene, the son and heir of the exiled Napoleon III of France. But these considerations came to an end after his death, and it was said, "Dear Beatrice, crying very much, as I did too, give me the telegram. It was dawning, and little sleep did I get, and Beatrice is so distressed. Everyone is quite stunned." It was suggested that Beatrice marry her sister Alice's widow, Louis of Hesse, but this was also shut down, as it was at the time forbidden by law. But whilst visiting Damst, Beatrice fell in love with Prince Henry, who returned her affections. She told her mother about her plans to marry, and Victoria was stunned. She did not talk to her daughter for 7 months because of this, and Beatrice married Henry of Battenberg near to Osborne House on the Isle of Wight on the 23rd of July 1885. She wore her mother's wedding veil and was escorted by the Queen, and was also attended on by 10 royal bridesmaids. The ceremony was attended by many, and after a short honeymoon, Beatrice returned to her mother's side, and her husband was rather content to do this. The Queen at the time was getting older, and she knew she could not govern as well as she once could, and for this she was helped by Beatrice. Beatrice's husband wanted to go on military campaigns, and a Royal Navy officer was kept close by to keep an eye on him, but Victoria, when Prince Henry did not escape to Corsica, was brought back like a naughty child aboard a British warship on the orders of Queen Victoria. Beatrice continued to work as her mother's full-time confidant and secretary, and she gave birth to a son named Alexander. She gave birth to 4 children in total. However, she suffered a significant amount of heartbreak following learning of her husband's death in the January of 1896. One of the biggest shocks in the life of Princess Beatrice was a rough one, and it was that her mother was not infallible, and when Victoria died on the 22nd of January 1901, Beatrice was heartbroken. She claimed, "You may imagine what the grief is, who had already ever been separated from my dear mother. can hardly realise what life will be like without her, who was the centre of everything. She fell from power in the royal household, and she was not part of the king's inner circle, and she continued to try and maintain her mother's legacy where she could. There were great changes in England, and the new king had turned Osborne House from a private family residence to a socialite mansion, and Beatrice was not happy with this. Her biggest task, following the death of Queen Victoria, was the huge task of editing her mother's diary and journals. There were hundreds of volumes, and Victoria wanted private material and hurtful material deleting, and she got rid of so much that only a third of the edited versions were kept. The originals were destroyed as she went and continued her task. But as she got older, her appearance in public became fewer. Her daughter became the Queen of Spain through marriage, and Beatrice lived at Osborne Cottage in East Cowes before she then moved into Carisbrooke Castle. Her favourite son Maurice died during the First World War, and she then retired from public life and adopted the surname Windsor, and also became known as HRH, the Princess Beatrice. Her younger son Leopold was made a Marquess, and he was the haemophiliac, and he inherited the royal disease, but died before his 33rd birthday following bleeding out during a knee operation. But at the end of World War I, Beatrice became a patron of Veterans Association and Support Network, and in her 70s she still held company with friends and relatives. She was pushed in a wheelchair to witness the many wreaths that were laid following the death of King George V, and she was a survivor and the last child of Victoria left standing. On the 26th of October 1944, at the age of 87, Princess Beatrice died in her sleep, the day before the 30th anniversary of her son, Prince Maurice's death. She had a large funeral service inside the St George's Chapel in Windsor Castle, and her coffin was then lowered into the royal vault for some time. This was, of course, all going on whilst the Second World War was raging on and bombs were crashing down on London and many British cities and towns, and at the end of the Second World War, her coffin was removed from the royal vault and was then taken to the Isle of Wight and was interred inside of a giant tomb alongside her husband in St Mildred's Church in Whippingham. This was her final wish. She wanted to be buried with her husband. And out of all of Queen Victoria's children, Princess Beatrice was the shyest and also quietest, but she was very devoted to her mother, and she went with Victoria practically wherever she went and travelled. She took many photographs of her mother, and she had many different patronages, and she was someone who had very high standards but also championed many different things. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching.